money, power, galas, giant checks, fancy people. I'm betting that these are the sorts of things you often imagine when you're thinking about fundraising and philanthropy. But what if these things are just a ruse? What if philanthropy actually involves things like coaching, creativity, community care? Our guest today is practiced in all three of these things, and our conversation really illuminates how essential all three things are to real philanthropy. The kind of philanthropy that isn't just another play for power and influence in our individualistic, capitalistic culture, but is a true love for our fellow human beings and the world we share. Listen in for the deep lessons that came through in this lovely conversation. And also, be sure to stay to the end, where we're talking about an exciting new initiative called the Community Care Collective that we're launching in 2026, including the taste of the collective that we're offering to you, our colleagues in philanthropy, this November and December during the stressful end of calendar year fundraising season. Thank you for being here. I'm so grateful to have you in this community. Welcome to the For the Love of Humanity podcast, a place for those who'd like to see philanthropy be less of the industry it has become and return to its roots, love of humanity. This place is beautiful and hopeful, and it's nothing without you. Community is the way. Community has always been the way, and philanthropy has lost its way as it's developed over the years. We are re-centering community at For the Love of Humanity, and community is what we seek in everything we do. Friends, to love and care for our fellow human beings is one of the most human things we can do. Let's get back to the roots of what it means to be human. Let's return to true philanthropy together. Today, we have with us Betsy McDermott Altheimer. She's a coach, fundraising consultant, writer, visual artist, collaborator, strategic advisor, and the founder of Table Fort Coaching and Consulting. She thrives on supporting transformational change in individuals and nurturing vital, responsive, healthy organizations, networks, and communities. She is trained in executive coaching at the University of St. Thomas and certified by the International Coaching Federation as an associate certified coach. She continues to study somatic and embodied leadership with Coaches Rising, Generative Somatics, and the Strozzi Institute. She holds a BA in visual art from the University of Wisconsin-Eau Claire and studied nonprofit management at Virginia Commonwealth University. Her work combines leadership coaching and organizational strategy to align purpose and to build clarity and momentum. She has raised over $50 million for racial and economic justice, arts and culture, design, community development, health, environmental, and education organizations. And she says it's her greatest joy to partner with inspiring humans as they do incredible things. Betsy lives in a cozy house near Wakpatanka, or Mississippi River in Minneapolis, on the homeland of the Dakota people, with her husband Ross, her daughters Eliza and Maggie, and a dog called Nyan. Welcome, Betsy.
Hello. I'm so happy to be with you.
Something I've started with the folks I've interviewed so far is to start by sharing a story of a time that you felt dehumanized, and then share a story of a time that you felt especially human or humanized. And we really are getting at this because this podcast is called For the Love of Humanity. And it's all about rooting into our shared humanity in all the things we do. And I think many of us don't even realize how much we're dehumanizing ourselves and others in our day-to-day life. So my hope is that the more people hear examples of how dehumanization looks and feels and sounds in real life, the less it will happen, the less we'll perpetuate it.
Yeah, absolutely. I was thinking about this today and I decided that maybe it's the same story. I know we're going to talk about this with our time together today because I know what you and I tend to talk about. But I had a health crisis a couple of years ago and I ended up at a big hospital for a screening. I think it was my MRI. And I remember getting to the space where they do all of the screenings, and it was like a giant waiting room. And I went up to the desk and they literally didn't even ask me my name. They asked me for some paperwork or they asked me for a number. I don't even remember. And they gave me that device that they give you when you go out to eat, where it's like, it's a buzzer that lights up and flashes and buzzes when it's your turn. And I just remember feeling like, here I am. It was a very scary moment. I happened to be there by myself, thinking it was kind of a routine screening. And then through that exchange of not saying my name and then getting this device, I felt very invisible. And I remember going back to my chair and sitting with this thing and just feeling really bad, feeling really low. And at the same time, I was sitting there and noticing that, and I just started to look around the room.
Mm.
And there was literally dozens of people in all different states of health. Some people were alone, some people were with a partner, some people were with some sort of health aide, some people were with their entire family. And I think just sitting in that space, I started to tap into, well, I learned it from Pema Chodron, the Tibetan nun, the practice of Tonglen, which is to really connect with, if you feel like you're suffering and you breathe into that and stay with it, and anyone else who's ever felt that way. So I feel like moving into that space felt very dehumanizing. And then sitting in that space and sitting in that discomfort and really looking around felt very humanizing and very connecting. And rather than sitting in my own sadness or fear, I just felt such deep love for everybody in that room who was also in the same experience. And I had another experience probably a couple months later that was very similar, where I was in another waiting room in the same hospital and a machine broke down and all of our appointments got backed up. And so we all were sitting there together wondering if our day was going to be totally smeared from the scheduling issue. And then some of the people who were there for treatment were from out of town, and it was going to push them over the weekend. And it was the most amazing space because we were all in this hard place, in this difficult place. And the generosity in that room blew me away. I met a man who was staying at the Ronald McDonald House next to the hospital, and he has a family a few hours away. And he was like, if I don't get my treatment today, I have to stay through the weekend and I'm going to miss more of my time at home. And we were all trying to give each other our appointment slots and like rearranging our lives just to support one another. So I do feel like, yeah, my question about feeling dehumanized is sometimes you feel like you are a cog in a machine.
Mm-hmm.
But I feel like the very humanizing experience is recognizing that you're not alone in that experience, that everybody at some point has or will feel that way. So that's a really powerful connection point. I don't like to dwell on the suffering, but I do feel like understanding that all of us suffer is a really amazing way to connect with others. That's my thought.
It is one of the most universal human experiences, right? I mean, it's pretty hard to live a human life and not suffer at all. But yeah, that's so amazing to me that your story is one and the same for both questions, because for me, where the switch gets flipped between it being a dehumanizing experience for you and then it turning into a very human-full experience, a humanizing experience, was an inner process that you took on. You were sitting there feeling not great. And rather than just dwelling in that, which a lot of us do, right? You decided, I want to find a way to not be in this space. I want to do a practice that will help me not feel this way. And what that led you to was feeling more connected to everybody else there. And I can totally picture that room that you were in because I've had that same experience. So many of the folks that are there have so many other vulnerabilities and marginalizations layered on top of the health thing that's going on. And so it's so beautiful that you were able to tune into them and send some love their way. I love that you did that.
Yeah. Well, and I love that too. In public spaces or airports or these systems we all move through, when you're in line at the grocery store, right? This morning I was buying my dog pet food, and the woman who was checking out in front of me, they were having all sorts of difficulties. And I had no urgency. So I was just standing there holding a giant bag of dog food. And she was like, "Thank you so much for your patience," when she finally got to me. And I was like, oh my gosh, it's really not a big deal. I'm not in a hurry. And I think that so often, yeah, we feel like we just have to keep moving at a certain pace. And I feel like slowing down and really having curiosity about what's actually around you, it's a good trick. It's a good hack.
I realize that too. When I am in a rush, I am not in a good place to love people around me, to be human with people around me. I am most likely to dehumanize another person if I am in a rush.
Oh, totally. Or get just so annoyed, like they're there just to serve you, or that like your timeline or your priorities are so much more important than theirs. And I think that that's so common in our culture, like when we're just rushing around or we have deadlines or we have emergencies. And so I do think like that. And I forget, I mean, like you and I talked yesterday and I was totally scattered and tired. I had a good night's sleep last night. I feel like I'm able to be much more, I don't know, intentional, connected. But again, it's a practice. It's a switch you can actually flip if you're aware of it.
It is. And as we're talking, it's occurring to me how much it really does take some strong countercultural energy to do this, right? Like strong swim strokes, like upstream, like the river is pouring towards us in one direction, like the energy of how we're trained and conditioned to be by the world around us. And we're having to turn around and swim against that current because, yes, this world we live in, it's capitalistic, it's individualistic, it's about me, it's about rush, 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 it's about more, more, more. And so if we're just going with the flow, we're not going to be able to do what we're talking about. And so it's like we have to make that decision. And it's not even just a decision. My point is, it's kind of effortful.
You just touched on one of my favorite metaphors. Years ago, I decided to do the short distance triathlon here in town. And I played soccer and ran my whole life. And biking seemed easy, but the swim had me really nervous. And so I decided to take swim lessons. And the instructor taught us a new style of swimming that is what Olympians use. It's called total immersion swimming. And some of the concepts of it I think about all the time. And in that particular part of my life, it was significant for me. But basically, because we are not mammals that live in water, almost as soon as we get in the water, we snap into survival mode. We arch our head up so that we can stay near oxygen. And we flap our arms and legs to the point of exhaustion. So the thing in total immersion, which I think of as a metaphor for so much of how you move through life, is you actually have to angle your head down against your survival instinct. And then rather than just flapping your arms and legs, you actually like snap them and glide. So you are not exhausting yourself. You're actually using your own twisting motion to propel yourself forward. So there's something really powerful about you saying swimming against the current, and that swimming against our own nature is somehow how we can actually have more energy. So our instincts are the way we're wired, the way we move in certain contexts is to just survive, right? And it's a rushed panic feeling like you're thrown into water and you don't know how to swim. But when you slow down, move towards your fear with intention and glide, you conserve energy. And I just think about that so much and I love it so much. So I love that you use that as a description.
I love that metaphor too. I feel like it gives us a little bit of grace as human beings in that a lot of these things that we do that are probably suboptimal behaviors, right? Things like where we might rush too much or where we might dehumanize other people, right? A lot of it is just trying to survive. Like we have such an innate part of being a mammal, being a human, such a strong impulse to survive this life. And so it is true that that also makes us see other people as the competition or as a threat rather than lovely people in whom we can immerse ourselves rather than something that is a threat. We can find that people are a refuge, a beautiful place that we can land and be and just relax. We don't have to be on edge around other people. Other people can be the very means by which we get our needs met, just like that story you told with
Yeah.
the scheduling issue. Think about how different that experience would have been if everybody would have just been looking out for themselves and, thinking, oh, I need to beat out all these other people and make sure I get my needs met. There's a world in which that would have been the response. I could totally see that happening, right?
Yeah.
That's not what happened. Everybody relaxed. They sort of somehow overcame that survival instinct. And it seems like part of what helped them overcome it was just caring about the other people that were there, right? Caring about their stories and their needs as they told them, and then just trying to help them meet them.
Yeah. And I mean, there's something about that experience where like everyone was kind of in the same situation, right?
Mhm.
So I think that often we tend to think people's experiences are so different from ours or like they wouldn't understand. And I do think when we can settle into a larger sense of belonging or just understanding we all are dealing with whatever it is we're dealing with, that helps us to open up to each other in that way, where it's like, oh, I see you. Here's what I have to offer. Here's what I can bring. And then I just feel like that's the essence of community, right? But I feel like it's something that our culture it's like a muscle that's sort of atrophied. I think between the pandemic and all the division politically and culturally, we forget that we have more in common than we don't. And that we all have a lot of these things that we can connect around, whether it's the things that are really challenging or the things that bring us joy. And I think that looking around part is when you're in the panic or the amygdala part of your brain, you forget that you are surrounded by support
Mhm.
if you look at it that way.
Yeah, surrounded by water that doesn't have to be a threat to you. It could be the very substance that's holding you up and
Yes.
keeping you afloat. I can totally see that image in my mind. And also, I'm realizing that there are situations where we're more likely to see that shared experience and those commonalities. And it often is when, say, there's a car crash and everybody's working together to make sure everybody's okay, or there's a
Yeah.
situation where people are sick in a hospital. And I would just love to see people able to move into that space more when there's not some obvious thing that everybody has in common, especially a bad thing or a tragic thing. Even just in the day to day, like we're talking about, like in the grocery store, when we see another human, we are having a shared experience here together, like in the same way that we would if we were both in a waiting room for an MRI.
Yeah. It's amazing.
So thank you for sharing those stories. I think they were rich with a lot of meaning, and I really appreciate that. And I think some of this has already come out in the way that you talk. It's just a big part of how you move through the world. You're a coach. It's a big part of your professional identity and work. And the thing about coaching is I have noticed that it seems to be seemingly spread all over the scene lately. I have noticed lots of people are talking about coaching. Lots of people are hiring coaches, way more than I've ever heard before. Lots of people are calling themselves coaches. So I'm wondering if you can help me and the listeners understand from your experience as both a coaching learner and practitioner, what is coaching?
Yeah, I love that question. I would define it as it's a skill and it's providing presence for another person in a way that moves them forward. So when I started coaching school, I thought for sure that I'd been coaching It turns out I'd been doing a lot of things, and some of it was coaching, but what I learned really changed my life and how I show up in a lot of different spaces. I think a big part of what coaching is what it's not, which is giving advice. In my work as a consultant, I'm often there as an expert or there as somebody to give answers or to collaborate on solutions. And coaching can have that. Usually I ask for consent to bring that to a coaching conversation, but coaching is really about holding space for a person or a team or a group that is trying to do something differently or something new or to understand something from a different perspective, and really holding the space open for them to explore that on their terms really requires getting out of the way as far as what the coach wants or sees or assumes or understands. Really, it's about staying very curious and very present with what's coming up. I think of it a lot like when you're driving a car at night and you can just see where the headlights end. So you kind of don't know what's next, but you're helping somebody guide themselves towards the direction they're going. Because I do consult as well as coach, there's a lot of relationship negotiation. There's a lot of clarity and boundaries and consent that we explore as we work together. So I think it's just helped me be a better person and how I am in relationship.
One of the things I just wanted to tease out a little bit more was when you were talking about what it is to be a coach is to be very present to the other person that you're coaching for whatever comes up, right? So that person is not being worked on by you, right? They're working with themselves and you're just there to help them. And I could see how that process for the person who is the practitioner might be hard in a world where so much of the models we see, so much of it is about, I'm a practitioner, so I'm going to do X, Y, Z, and then this is going to be the outcome. I wonder if for you and for the others that have studied coaching alongside you, was that process of letting go and being willing to just be present for whatever comes up, was that hard? And what was that like?
Oh, it is so challenging and so rewarding and a continual practice. So one of the best things about being in a community of coaches is that I still have people I can practice with and learn from and keep up my skill set. Again, coaching is a skill. So I feel like having a coaching skill set can benefit you if you're a doctor, if you're a teacher, if you're a therapist, if you're a manager of people. And I do think that the skill set and becoming a professional coach can benefit everybody in some level in their work. But yeah, so much of our professional world is really about ego or accomplishment or expertise or authority.
Yeah.
It took a long time in coaching school to be trained out of advice giving and opinion. And you know what I think you should do? Or like, have you thought about this? No, it's really just that curiosity, deep, deep curiosity and staying with it. That's why I think coaching is a profession. People want a trusted partner to help them hold some big questions. So it's a balance, right? Between being very open to what is coming up and holding it open for people, and then also helping them feel like they're moving forward and they're not just staying in things, that they're making decisions or learning something, but it's directed by them and co-created in a coaching space.
I can see how there would be a fair amount of internal pride and just being in charge-edness, right? Like I was referring to, where if I'm going to be the professional, there'd be a fair amount of that to overcome. And then the other thing that occurs to me, and these two things can be two sides of the same coin, is I imagine for a lot of people, there'd be a fair amount of fear to overcome.
Yeah.
Because if you feel like you don't know what's going to come up and you don't trust yourself that you will be able to handle or respond to whatever comes up, that can be very anxiety provoking, just to feel like, oh my God, I have no idea. I have no idea what might come up and I have no idea how I would handle it. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. I do think getting coach training is really valuable for that reason because it covers ethics, it covers deep practice. ICF emerged to create a set of standards for how you're doing what you're doing so you're not unintentionally causing harm. And then I do think, yeah, it's like you were saying before the call about your podcast equipment. You learn these skills and then it takes a while to practice. So you're not like a dancing partner who keeps looking at their feet, right? Like you're able to clear the space in your mind or in your body so that you're able to be with what is coming up and be curious about it, which it takes a lot of practice. But yeah, it's vulnerable work. And I love that I've made it part of my practice because then I'm surrounded by people who are always in that space for themselves and for others. So it feels really rich that way. If I ever feel like I'm in a space where I'm like, what do I do next? Or how do I think about this? I have this whole community of people who I can call on who have been trained in this specific way to show up and support. So yeah.
As you kind of referenced earlier, I love thinking of it not as like, if somebody would be interested in learning more about coaching, they don't have to think about it in terms of like, I'm going to become a professional coach that has coaching clients. They could be in any kind of role. And especially if they're managing people or just even working with people, period, it just seems like such an effective way to work with people, to help people move from here to there. I could see it being such a helpful skill set and practice for so many people. I'm curious if you could just say a little bit about this organization related to coaching that you're on the board of for the listeners who might be interested in learning more about how they could pursue more learning or experiences with coaching.
Yeah, absolutely. So when I went through training, the program I was in was part of the University of St. Thomas Executive Education Program. They decided not to house the program in 2020, but the curriculum and the really intense training program that had been there for years was owned by the faculty. So in 2020, we started a nonprofit called the Center for Coaching and Organizations. We just had a 5-year celebration a couple weeks ago, and we offer intensive coach training, an 11-month coach training program that is exceptional and gets people prepared to apply to the ICF to get their certification. We also have created a community of coaches. So we have all sorts of opportunities for continuing education. We do an online summit every year. We've also started creating offerings that are similar to what you were just talking about, where it's like peer coaching. So people are trained within an organization to coach and support each other, no matter what seat they're in. It looks like somebody might be your peer or your manager, but you can come to them and be like, I need to have a coaching conversation, or I'd like to have a coaching conversation, and it shifts the dynamic. So we have created all sorts of offerings like that for learning coaching skills, whether you want to be a professional coach or not. And then for professional coaches, having continuing education and community, which feels like the most powerful part. And we have student coaches who are, learning. So there's accessible prices. I mean, it's a wonderful resource. So it's called the Center for Coaching and Organizations.
I love it. I will include the link in the show notes for this episode. I feel, as we've discussed, if more relationships in the working world could have people able to practice this skill set, my goodness, I think so much would improve, because I've noticed that workplace relationships are so many politics and power dynamics.
Yeah.
Feels like one of the things that this approach does is sort of diffuse the power dynamics in a way that helps nobody have power over anybody. The two people are just meeting each other with presence and working with each other, power with each other. If more work could happen that way, instead of people angling for power or sort of stepping on each other or having silly arguments or things like that, my goodness, can you imagine how different the typical workplace would be?
Yeah, completely. Yeah. And I think, again, it's like we were talking about before, we're moving so quickly through our days. The world moves at a certain pace. And I do think that coaching is like the little release valve sometimes where you can step away and have a partner to reflect on what's actually going on. And I feel like it's just having a skill set to pause and reflect. It's just not taught in our culture very much. I feel like I came to this work in my 30s, and I'm like, man, if I had known these skills when I was a teenager or an early professional, it's really powerful.
So in addition to being a coach, you also identify as an artist. I'm curious, how do you think being trained as a creative has affected your working life?
I feel like, again, being trained as a creative was wonderful. I feel like I've been an artist or a creative person since I was born. It's sort of how I move and what I love and a way of being. So being able to pursue that as part of my education was just an incredible joy. And also, I think similar to coaching, being taught to really look and really see and to really listen and to really move. The training that is arts training and the work of creativity, there's all this research now about how it is actually life-saving. I mean, we know that anecdotally. I know so many people. I was talking with a photographer this week who said photography saved my life. People say that sort of thing all the time. But I think being a creative person and engaging in the creative arts, and I'm going to say adjacent to that, being connected to culture, whether it's your ethnicity, your traditions, I feel like this is the stuff that makes us so human.
Hmm.
So I really think of creativity and art as wellness completely. And I also think of it personally as spirituality. I have a hard time separating all of these things in my mind. So yeah, sometimes when you're in a sticky situation, again, if we think about that waiting room, and I can sometimes flip into like, if I were going to tell this as a story, like what are the elements? Or looking around the room and being like, what color was the paint? What did that person's hair look like? So that ability to actually see, it's a way of just adjusting how you are in an experience. I feel like creativity is just, it's powerful. It's a huge part of how I move, not just work, but like everything I do. So I have a hard time separating it from anything.
I totally get that. And believe it or not, I just had a conversation with an artist friend yesterday who said the same thing. Becoming an artist saved my life.
Yeah. Yeah.
I agree with you that I think it's so powerful how it can just connect someone with the best parts of themselves. I was also thinking about how for you that it intersects with spirituality. And I was thinking about how there's a lot of people that it's part of their spirituality, their religion, that they were created in the image of the creator. So what does that mean? If someone is created in the image of the creator, that means that that person is a creator. We were created in the image of a creator, that means that we were made to create. And so I can see how, like you're talking about, when we're doing that, when we are creating, when we're being creative, there's a way of understanding that that is one of the ways to be most human, because we're just being fully alive and letting life move through us.
Yeah. Sometimes when I feel discouraged about, you have those days where you're like, what is wrong with people? When you can see it, there's a lot of evidence right now of people not being great. But there's this Instagram account that shows music creators from all over the world.
Oh, yeah.
And every time when I feel discouraged, I look for people playing, right? Like they're making art, they're making music, they're dancing, they're involved in sport. The best part of humans, in my opinion, is imagination. We have these incredible brains and spirits where we can invent things from nothing. We can shift perspectives in different cultures all over the world. That's actually how people make community. That's how they make I don't know, whether you call it God, creator, whatever, but that's how you make the sacred present is through these beautiful human rituals, which always involve, music and art and fashion and, all the different ways that we make. I just think it's the coolest part of our species.
Oh, I know. I think I know exactly which Instagram account you're talking about.
Yep.
And I think I probably found it through watching your Instagram stories. And I now follow it too. And I agree with you that that is one of the most joyful. Like if I'm having a bad day and I want to just feel more grounded in my own body and more human, that's the kind of thing I need to see. I will get that handle from you, and we will put that in the show notes too. That is just such a cool Instagram account. I have to say, a lot of people badmouth social media. And I mean, there are reasons why they do, but I think I have been very intentional about how I have curated my social media. And I would say by and large, my experience when I decide to go on and look at some social media for a while is pretty positive. I'm countering things like that on Instagram. It's sort of like when I want a moment just to be and not be right in my present moment, I will find things like that. And it's just such a great resource.
My daughter and I were just talking about this yesterday. I think we were having a conversation about AI. And we were just coming back to, every tool can be used as a weapon. And I feel like we're in a moment right now where a lot of these technologies that are human created could get us into trouble. But the things I love about them are all the things that they can help us do. People freaked out about the printing press. People freaked about television. They freaked out about the internet. They freaked out about social media. And yeah, that's proven true in some ways. But I'm like, how are you using it? With our kids, that was always our strategy. Be a creator, not just a consumer. And I think that's a good way to be in the world, right? Don't just digest whatever is coming at you. You participate. You have autonomy. You have agency. How do you want to move? And what are you contributing?
I think that's a good approach because I mean, it is going to be here no matter what. So, like, why not try to help make it more of a force for good? Yes. In addition to being a coach and an artist, you are also a fundraiser. That's one of the things we have in common. And you have been for a long time. And I'm just curious if you can talk a little bit about fundraising and especially how it intersects with these other parts of you, the coach and the artist. How do you feel fundraising relates to art and coaching?
Yeah. So I got into fundraising because of art. So a lot of the organizations I first worked for were arts and culture organizations. And again, I went to school for visual art, but I also have always loved to write. So working for arts organizations and being somebody who loves to write, I very quickly got into grant writing and also loving art and artists and people who create culture. One of the ways I've always loved those people has been supporting them materially as well as enjoying their work. I'm really invested in to support art. You support the people who make art. To support culture, you invest in organizations that promote culture. When I was in college, all my friends were artists because we were all studying art. And I remember helping organize the Art Student Association and then writing a grant for this really cool kiln for my friend who is a potter. So I've always been like, what are the things people need and how do we make that happen? The way I was raised in my family has always been, okay, if you want to see something, how do you support it to make sure it's here and continues? So I've always seen myself as part of an ecosystem of artists. And my particular skill was that I could write. And it turns out when I write well, people get material support for their practice. So I've been doing that for 25, 30 years. And it's also been wonderful because it brings me into so many unusual spaces. Being a fundraiser is sort of like being an artist. I get invited into conversations where I can just be totally curious and a learner, which feels very much like art to me. I don't necessarily know everything that's going on, but I've got the skills to see what's there, to deeply listen, to craft stories about it. I just feel like that's so important. So much of fundraising is making these good things visible.
Yeah.
And bringing folks' attention to those things that are important. Fundraising definitely feels like my job. More than coaching or art, but all of them are my calling, I would say. I feel like these are different skills that I've developed my entire life. So they connect to each other in big ways. Yeah.
And I mean, you are embodied right in front of me. So it's clear how they intersect because they all intersect within you. But even hearing you describe that, it's just so clear how it could intersect in a lot of people. And so it's sort of like caring about something a lot and
Yep.
then feeling like you maybe have skills to help support it and make it happen, and then learning how to do that. And that was certainly my path into fundraising too. And I think that's one of the ways that I think fundraising is creative. You're helping bring things into being. And that
Yeah.
part, that is one of the most exciting and also just satisfying, I guess, parts about fundraising.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, it's really, I do think of it as creative work. I think fundraisers are incredibly creative, whether it's, through how they're communicating or through their relationship skills or through how they see an entire ecosystem and a field that they work in. I think that the work is just inherently creative.
Yes, I agree. If you'd like to engage in this conversation with the For the Love of Humanity podcast community, you can leave a message by texting or calling 1-612-440-4819. That's 1-612-440-4819. Keep your message as concise as you can, especially if you'd like it shared on the air. And be sure to indicate in your message whether you're cool with us airing it publicly with your first name. Otherwise, we can air it anonymously too. And remember, you can either call and leave a voice message or you can text. Either one works. And let us know your preference about sharing, whether with your name or anonymously. I really hope to engage in conversation with you this way, so please do call or text. That's 1-612-440-4819. So if it's not clear to the listener already, just based on a few side comments, Betsy and I know each other fairly well at this point. I think we're fairly dear to each other by this point, but we actually have not known each other that long. We orbited around each other for years, just having a lot of the same people in common, kind of hearing each other's names, but not actually knowing each other until when, a couple of years ago or so, we were introduced by a mutual friend who thought we were not only kindred spirits, but at the time, we were both navigating a breast cancer diagnosis. And so I'm curious, what has your experience with cancer taught you? And has it changed anything about you and about your life?
Yeah. Yeah. And first of all, it's brought wonderful people into my life like yourself. I think when people aren't always sure how to support you, sometimes they connect you with somebody else who might be able to help you navigate. So I'm very grateful for some of the relationships that have formed and deepened. I would say that going to coaching school and being an artist and being just a person who's growing older in this world, I've been learning a lot about how to be a person and how to move in ways that keep me well, to self-advocate. But cancer was really even more of that. So again, I was talking about coaching before and how it really, learning how to talk about consent and where I lean in and where I lean out in relationship or how I design things for what I need. I feel like getting a cancer diagnosis and then just trying to navigate treatment took that all to a higher level. And I also feel very lucky. I had very early stage cancer. My treatment was pretty minimal, but I feel like it has deepened my understanding and my empathy for, again, everybody who hears that word in relation to their body and how it affects everybody so differently. As somebody who's very oriented towards others, it was a real crash course and no, for real. You need to prioritize your own stuff or you're good for nobody. I feel like that was the biggest education. And then just the deepening of understanding for how suddenly things can shift for me and for others.
Yes.
So I feel like, the two things were priorities and real deepening of empathy for everybody. And again, when I was talking about that waiting room, it was like one of my early diagnostic processes. You're like, whoa, I was healthy yesterday. And now I'm sitting in this room with people at all different stages of life and all different stages of health. And we are all here together.
Mm-hmm.
How had I just been barreling through my life and worrying about dumb things, like your to-do list and things that don't really matter. So I think, just a diagnosis of any sort can drop you into that space of, wait, what really matters? What do I really want? What am I really doing? And then just that idea of how you are together. I had a full roster of clients when I got my diagnosis, and I had some very big projects I was working on. And my first fear was, who's going to take care of my people? I have all these clients who I really care about, I'm really invested in. And so I reached out to probably 10 other nonprofit consultants, and I started building this network. And I kept thinking, why hadn't I built this before? Why don't I have this community around me all the time? Why am I not always developing this robust sense of support? Here I am flapping my arms and legs when I could have just been floating a little bit more or asking people to take turns. So I think those are the biggest lessons.
I would say that so much of what you learn is I have learned similar lessons from the experience for sure. And I hope that that last thing you said is something that folks listening will especially hear, because it speaks to ways to make your life more rich and meaningful, even before you have to have a life-threatening diagnosis to kind of smack you awake, which is community is everything. And it's so important for us to be cultivating that in our lives, because it's not only the way that we can achieve all the things we're trying to achieve better, right? Like, I know that I'm a better fundraiser when I'm surrounded by other fundraisers, in community with other fundraisers. I can reach out for everything from, do you have experience with this funder? What have you experienced? Or we're hiring. Can you help me spread the word? Or we need a vendor for XYZ. Who have you have anybody that you can recommend? There's just, it helps you be more successful in your work. And even more importantly, it just helps you live your day-to-day life in a way that is so much more joyful and meaningful and full of life, right? Versus kind of putting your head down and just focusing on your work and getting tunnel vision and just do, versus if you're putting your head up, taking some time to reach out, really be present and connect with another person, really feel yourself relaxing a little bit into that community instead of being in that fight, flight, freeze, fawn, heightened amygdala state. That is just a better way to experience life.
Yeah. And I will say that just like you asked me about coaching and the vulnerability of learning to be a coach, I do think there's a lot of vulnerability about also being someone that I allow people to show up for me, that I still feel like I'm reflecting on. And so I feel like, yeah, it's just wonderful to have people where you can be that open and really let them in. I feel like I've built friendships through the last few years. I'm trusting them in new ways and letting them hold me in new ways. So for the listeners, I will just say that speaking is something that I've been leaning into, and Cecilia has been a great champion, friend, supporter, and collaborator. So even being in this space with her today feels vulnerable and wonderful, and a lesson from the last few years of just continuing to grow and try things and, put yourself out there.
The people are grateful. The people, thank you that you are willing to put yourself out there. So the related question I have for you now is related, especially because of our shared experiences with cancer and burnout. You and I both have, unfortunately, experiences with burnout. We're especially passionate about holistic wellness, especially as it relates to work in fundraising and philanthropy, which has a justified reputation as a stressful field where burnout is common. And I hate to say it, but I think is even becoming more common these days. So I'm curious, Betsy, what are some of the ways that you pursue holistic wellness within your life and work?
Yeah, it's a lot of what we've been talking about already. I think really self-advocacy. So being really honest with people about capacity, what you can and can't do. Community. I feel like, especially in the last couple of years when things feel overwhelming, being able to both show up for other people and also show up vulnerably if you need support. So I really feel like that's a skill that needs developing. Creativity. I do feel like, whether it's on your own or in community, that really tending to your creative self and spirit in that way. In nature is where I connect with spirit a lot, but I also feel like finding that deeper meaning is a big part of wellness. I think those are the big ones for me today. Did I miss anything?
For me, I would say that I don't think you really missed anything because I think some of the big things are tuning into myself. So I actually know what I need. There definitely have been periods of my life where I could not have told you what I was feeling if you asked me. I could not have told you what I needed in a moment if you asked me. And so I've done a lot of work over the years at really becoming more self-aware and just more tuned into myself. And
Yeah.
so to me, that is sort of the prerequisite for the self-advocacy that you referenced, because I can't really advocate for myself if I'm not caring for myself enough to actually know what I need and what I'm feeling. And so if I have tuned into myself, if I know what I need, if I'm willing to self-advocate, and then how I'm relating to others is another important thing. And if I'm relating in a way that is much more with relating with others, being in community with others, again, moving out of that space where people are feeling like somehow competition or a threat or whatever, and being in that heart space and that mind space where I'm collaborating with them. We're with each other in it. We're with each other in, even if it's a hard situation, that feels so much better than being alone in a hard situation. And then, you really did speak to the other piece that has been so important for me too, which is a deeper grounding in my purpose and in being a part of something bigger than myself, in a power that's bigger than myself. And then I think one thing I would add to is just acknowledging that I think wellness, like most things in our world today, has been a little co-opted by capitalism.
Yeah.
And so I think when a lot of people think about wellness, they think about, bubble baths and massages and things that you need to buy or things that require money. And I think there's an element of wellness that requires being poised in an inner sense and inside of yourself, being poised and ready to swim against the current, to be countercultural, as we've been talking about, because the wider culture is not prioritizing wellness, is not prioritizing tuning into ourselves for our own needs, tuning into others and being present with them to help them meet their needs. Like that is not the way the world is working out there right now. And so there's an element that's kind of badass about it, I think, which is knowing that we're going to be sort of swimming against the current. And when you think about plopping ourselves down within real life scenarios, like within teams or organizations, that's not always easy, right? It's not always easy to be swimming against the current, but that might fit into that bucket you were talking about of self-advocacy. And it's even more than self-advocacy. It's self-care, but it's also community care, because the more that we create environments and cultures and teams where folks are looking out for each other, being there for each other, supporting each other, asking for help and giving help, showing up for each other, I think that it's the kind of environment in which all of us can most thrive. So it's bigger than me when I think about my holistic wellness. I mean, yes, it's about me, but it's bigger than me too.
Absolutely. Yeah. I feel like there's so much, you were talking about settling into something bigger. I think you were talking about spirituality, but I also think settling into something bigger, that we are already community and that we can develop a practice where we're better at community, and that we create spaces where we can hold each other in different ways. Because we have a lot of people that we're connected to, right? But a lot of it might be professional or personal, or we tend to think of people in like one category and not another. So creating practices where we can just really see each other and be in it together. I love when you were talking about being with someone, whatever that means. But I think that there is really a need for a community of practice about a real true idea of community, whether it's in our neighborhoods or in our organizations or in our country. How do we show up for each other and really reconnect in a way that helps us be well and helps us support others' wellness?
Hmm, absolutely. And so if it's not clear, this is a topic that Betsy and I are both very passionate about. We live it, we breathe it. It's something that we care about a lot. And so it's just, of course, not surprising that these general topics are what we often end up talking about. And it's probably not surprising that these general topics are a way that we have really been moved to start collaborating with each other. And so I want to move on to talking a bit about the Community Care Collective, which, if you're wondering, what is that? I haven't heard of that. It's because it isn't a thing that's out in the world quite yet. It's going to be very soon, but it's just what it sounds like. Collective centered on community care for folks doing community-based work, like Betsy and I have been talking about, in particular fundraising. And you and I will be launching and guiding this collective next year, so 2026. And we're hosting 2 gatherings this year at the end of 2025 to give folks just a taste of what the collective will be like. So one will be in November and the other in December. I can include the specific details in the show notes. But what we want to do in November and December is, yes, give folks a taste, but also just offer a respite for our colleagues, the people that we fundraise with and are in community with, because we know that this time of year for most fundraisers is the busiest and most stressful time of the year. And so we wanted to offer this gift of this respite to all of you, all of our colleagues, all of the people that might be having a real tough time just getting through the end of the year. And so, Betsy, I'm wondering if we can just talk a little about the collective, if you can talk about what is your vision for it, and also even maybe who do you think will most benefit from joining us within it, or anything else that seems relevant to you to talk about.
Yeah, this is something that we have started creating in the last year. And again, it's really thinking about, the idea of self-care, the idea of what people need to take care of themselves, but also the big part of that is that withness that Cecilia was talking about. Like, how do we do this with others? How do we create a space where people feel like they're connected to a larger community of people who are asking the same questions, wondering the same things? I think some of the most powerful spaces that I've been in are these kinds of circles, people who have some things in common, but also are wondering if there's other ways to be. So we held a workshop over the summer months, and our intention for that workshop was really to create a pop-up community in the room. And it felt so good to both of us. And we got a lot of feedback from the folks who were in the room that it felt really good to them too, in the middle of conference, to have that space of respite, to have space to come back to their breath and their bodies. We practiced coaching skills in that space with each other. So we worked on things as individuals, we worked on things in partners, and then we worked on things as a collective in that room, and it felt like something that we wanted more of. So it felt really like something that is needed right now. I think people are feeling a lot of pressure. There's a lot of change and chaos going on in the world. So our hope is to create a space for people who want to come together and have some support, some community, some continuity, just to be with each other in the midst of all of it, on a real personal level. And also, related to work in mission-based spaces, to work in fundraising. But I think it's probably reaches a broader audience than that. So I think it's just people who are committed to caring for themselves and others. So we will start in 2026. We will have monthly calls to bring everyone together. And you can sign up for a season or you can sign up for the year, but really to have it be a generative space for all of us. What do you want to add to that, Cecilia?
I love the way you're talking about it. I want to add a couple of pieces of context about how this started coming into being this summer. As Betsy mentioned, we've been germinating this idea and starting to grow it for the better part of this year of 2025. And that was largely in preparation for this workshop in the summer. And Betsy and I didn't know what to expect in that workshop, but one of the things we kept saying is how we create this is important. In other words, we don't want to let either of us be at all stressed about this. Because if we're stressed in how we're working together, if we're stressed in how we're creating it, that's going to come through. And so we were very intentional at every stage of the process. We have been very intentional about creating community care between the two of us and practicing it between the two of us. And we knew that the way we showed up that day would be more important than just about anything else, right? Like more important than the PowerPoint slides that we created, more important than, the words that came out of our mouth. It was more about the energy that we brought. It was more about the presence that we brought and the fact that we could bring that grounded presence to the room and that we'd be helping others bring that grounded presence into the room too. So we had no idea what to expect. And then when it was the day of, like Betsy said, it was so powerful and so joyful to experience that in a group, especially in a group that was literally just coming together in that day, in that moment. I don't think we didn't quite know how it would go, but I think in some ways we knew how it would go based on what we know from our own experience in community and in community care. I think we knew there would be a magic in the room. But of course, you can't know that until you see it happen. And it was pretty amazing to see it happen in that in-person workshop. And then the cool part was the second piece I wanted to say was that part of what also propelled us to try to create this additional offering was we said to folks at the end, hey, if this was good for you, if you'd like to do more of this, leave your name and email on that sign-up sheet in the back of the room before you leave. And we had a bunch of people do that. So we had a bunch of people kind of putting up their hands and saying, yes, this was good. More of this, please. And so we're responding to that. We're responding to those folks that asked us for more explicitly. And then also on the assumption that there are probably a lot more of you all out there who are hearing about this and something in you is lighting up and you're thinking, oh, yes, that's my jam. I feel like I want to experience that. I want to do that. And so that's why we're doing this. So I really genuinely hope that folks can make it to either the November offering or the December offering or even both. There's no reason you can't come to both as just two moments of rest and care and community in the midst of a stressful time as a fundraiser or as a community worker. And then I hope that you seriously consider joining us in 2026 for the cohorts that we'll do. We will have seasonal cohorts for every season, winter, spring, summer, autumn. And then if you're really into the idea, like Betsy said, you can sign up for the whole year too. So we'll see. We are being creative. We are being artists right now with this whole thing, aren't we, Betsy?
Absolutely. Yeah. And just really, like I said, inviting people into this generative space with us and seeing what's all around us as resourcing.
Mm-hmm. And I feel like what you just said leads perfectly into what I intended as my last question for you, which is, let's talk about abundance. I know this is something that you're passionate about, especially in your work as a fundraiser. And so I'm curious, how do you define abundance? And why do you think abundance is so important?
Yeah. Abundance is exactly what we were just talking about. It's settling into the idea that there's plenty, whatever plenty might be. And again, I think it's an act of imagination. It's an act of trust to lean into abundance. I've had a couple of opportunities this year to talk about abundance from a fundraising perspective. And I think particularly right now where it feels like people are pulling back, there's a lot of fear, there's this contraction happening, just like Cecilia keeps talking about it, going against the current. I feel like relaxing into abundance is the answer. And I don't mean like over the top riches. I mean that everything you need is here, which again, I think is the fundamental values of a creative person. A lot of the ways that fundraisers and their work have to show up is like everything we need is here. We just need to connect to it. And then this idea of community, right? So mutual support and community care, those are all places I think of as abundant. They never really go away. They're always available to you, but you have to be able to see it. So circling all the way back to the humanizing experience of being in a waiting room with other cancer patients and people feeling like their own personal panic about the situation they were in, and then turning to each other. And in that room, people had everything they needed, like somebody who needed a place to stay, somebody who might need a ride. And that's how I tend to think about creativity and how we move in community together. So I think our hope with even designing these offerings is that it will feel like a place of abundance for people who participate. Just like my friendship with Cecilia feels like a place of abundance where I don't exactly know where I'm going next or what I need, but I know that if I'm in community with you and we explore it, that I don't know, it just it doubles, triples, quadruples what we're connected to. And I think that's how money moves. That's how creativity moves. That's how nature moves. And I just think there's this much broader sense of connectedness that you can actually sense your way into. That is an antidote to a lot of what's going on in the world right now.
Amen. Yes, amen. I wholeheartedly agree with what you just said. And I do agree that it's a way to move through the world. And I do agree that what we're doing with the Community Care Collective will very likely cultivate it and grow it in all those that are participating, including us. We're convening the space and facilitating. We get to benefit from the beauty and the magic of that. Being the reality of what happens in a community, we get to benefit from that too.
Yeah. And just being really curious about what's coming up and what people need and designing for that.
I love it. So is there any final thing you would like to say as we close?
Just gratitude for you and for this space and for folks who are tuning in, and just to be connected to you all feels really good. And I'm grateful.
Well, we're grateful for you, Betsy. So thank you for coming and thank you for sharing of yourself. It's some really beautiful stuff that you shared. And I hope people listening can really take in a lot of the lessons that came through today, because I think a lot of them are really deep. And I think a lot of them are really meaningful. And they point the way to living life in a way that is joyful and meaningful. Thanks for joining us today. Hopefully you're left with some inspiration, some things to ponder, some topics that will spur further conversation between you and your friends and colleagues. If you'd like to engage in this conversation with the For the Love of Humanity podcast community, you can leave a message by texting or calling 1-612-440-4819. That's 1-612-440-4819. Be sure to indicate whether you're cool with your thoughts being shared on the air. Then, want to help us spread the word? Don't forget to follow and rate and review the pod wherever you get your podcasts. That'll help more people find us and help our community grow. Finally, visit the online community at fortheloveofhumanity.community and be sure to subscribe when you're there. Bye for now, friends.